that most poker players believe the game is about cards. A better hand wins, a worse hand loses. That's the game. Some go deeper and say it's about math, pot odds, expected value, equity calculations. If you can solve the equations, you win. But the greatest players who have ever sat at a felt table discovered something that neither of those explanations captures, something that a man named Napoleon Hill wrote about in 1937, long before Texas Hold'em was played in casinos, long before solvers existed, long before poker was broadcast on television and watched by millions. Hill spent 20 years studying the most successful people in American history. He interviewed industrialists, inventors, and self-made titans who had built empires from nothing, and when he distilled everything he learned into a single book, he called it Think and Grow Rich. Not work and grow rich, not study and grow rich. Think and grow rich. Because he had discovered that the primary difference between people who achieve extraordinary things and people who don't is not talent, not luck, and not opportunity. It is the architecture of their mind. What you're about to hear is what happens when you take those timeless principles, the ones that created billionaires and legends across every field of human achievement, and you hold them up against the game of poker. You will see yourself in them. You will see your mistakes in them. And if you take them seriously, you will see a path forward that has nothing to do with your hand strength and everything to do with who you are choosing to become. This is not a video about pot odds. It is a video about the mind that makes correct decisions when the pressure is real, the money is on the table, and the cards don't cooperate. That mind is built. And today we start building it. What comes next is the principle that Hill considered the starting point of all achievement, and the reason most poker players never reach their potential. Hill called it desire, not interest, not preference, not the vague hope that things go well. Burning, obsessive, consuming desire. The kind that reorganizes everything else in your life around a single goal. The kind you think about when you fall asleep and when you wake up. The kind that survives every setback because it is not conditional on results. He described it as the starting point of all achievement. Not talent, not education, not resources, desire. Because without desire, everything else, the strategy, the study, the hours at the table, is just going through motions. And going through motions produces mediocre results. Think about what this means in poker. Most players who call themselves serious about the game are not actually operating from burning desire. They're operating from something quieter. They like the game. They enjoy winning. They'd prefer to be better than they are. But when variance hits, when they run badly for 3 weeks, when the bankroll takes a serious hit, when every decision they make seems to result in a bad beat, that quiet preference isn't strong enough to pull them back to the table with discipline and intention. It tells them to take a break. It tells them the game is rigged. It looks for reasons to stop. Burning desire doesn't work that way. Burning desire takes a brutal week and turns it into data. It takes 3 weeks of running bad and turns it into a problem to be solved rather than evidence of a curse. It keeps a player in the chair, studying, reviewing, working on leaks, improving, not because the results demand it, but because the goal demands it. The players who have made lasting impacts on this game, the ones who are studied and quoted and whose names are known across the poker world, almost none of them had straight lines to the top. Almost all of them have stories of long periods of losing, of doubt, of being broke and questioning whether the game would ever pay off. What separated them was that their desire survived the variance. Their commitment to the goal was independent of the short-term outcome. Hill wrote that desire must be specific, not, I want to be a better poker player. That's a wish. The specific desire names the target, puts a number on it, puts a timeline on it, and treats the achievement as an inevitability rather than a possibility. The mind works differently when it's oriented toward a specific, non-negotiable target. Define yours. Not loosely, precisely. Because what you're about to learn only works in combination with a goal strong enough to hold all of it together. The next principle is the one that most players intellectually accept but emotionally resist, and it costs them more than any single poker mistake they'll ever make. Napoleon Hill called it faith. In a secular context, stripped of religious connotation, it means something very precise. The unshakable belief that your goal is achievable before the evidence confirms it. the ability to act as if the outcome is already secured while continuing to do the work that will actually secure it. This is psychologically sophisticated. Most humans are wired in the opposite direction. They want evidence first. They want proof that the strategy works before committing to it. They want to see the results before fully investing in the process. And in ordinary life, this is reasonable caution. In poker and in any high-variance, long-horizon pursuit, it is a fatal trap. Here is what happens to the player who lacks this kind of faith in their own long-term success. They run bad for 2 weeks. The bankroll is down. The evidence in front of them, the only evidence they're willing to count, says that either the strategy doesn't work or they don't have what it takes, so they change the strategy. They start second-guessing decisions that were correct. They tighten up when the correct response to a downswing is often to study more and trust the process more, not to abandon it. The player with Hill's version of faith responds differently. They understand, at a level that is not just intellectual, but genuinely felt, that results in the short term are not a reliable signal about quality of play. They understand that a player making excellent decisions will sometimes lose for extended periods. They understand that the variance in poker is not a bug in the game that shouldn't exist. It is a fundamental feature that makes the game profitable for skilled players over time, because it keeps bad players willing to sit down and play. This faith is not blind. It is not the faith of someone who plays incorrectly and believes they'll win anyway. It is the faith of someone who has done the work, who has genuine reason to believe in the quality of their process, and who is willing to endure the short-term turbulence of results because they are focused on a timeline that is long enough to actually matter. Building this faith requires evidence of a different kind, not hand results, study logs, leak identification, decision quality review. When you can look at your process honestly and see genuine improvement, when you can look at a losing session and identify that the decisions were good even though the results were bad, that becomes the foundation of the faith that variance cannot destroy. The third principle is where most players, even those with desire and faith, unknowingly undermine everything they've built. And it is the one Napoleon Hill tied most directly to the word legend, persistence. Hill dedicated more attention to this than nearly any other principle because he had observed, across every category of human achievement, that persistence was the single variable that most consistently predicted success, not talent. Persistence, not intelligence. Persistence, not even strategy or timing or circumstances. The people who achieved what they set out to achieve almost always shared one defining characteristic. They did not stop. In poker, persistence has a technical component that makes it different from persistence in most other domains. The game has variance. That means even perfect play can produce terrible results for weeks or months. The feedback loop between decision quality and financial outcome is not direct. It is noisy, delayed, and sometimes cruelly inverted. The best players can lose while the worst players win, for stretches long enough to break anyone who isn't genuinely committed to a long-term view. Most players' persistence is conditional. It survives a bad week. It survives a bad month if the months before were good, but it doesn't survive sustained adversity at the intersection of financial loss and ego threat. That combination, losing money and feeling like your identity as a poker player is being challenged at the same time, is where most players quit, pivot, or regress to bad habits they had worked hard to eliminate. Consider Chris Moneymaker, whose 2003 World Series of Poker main event victory is one of the most famous stories in the game's history. What is less discussed is the years of playing before that moment, the accumulation of losses, the time spent learning a game that does not reward partial commitment, the persistence in the face of repeated failure that built the foundation for what looked, to the world, like an overnight success. Or consider the countless players who grind mid-stakes cash games for years before finding a sustainable edge, who study relentlessly, who endure long downswings and rebuild bankrolls from near zero, who make the decision again and again to continue even when the evidence of a single month would justify walking away. Hill's framing was elegant. Every adversity carries within it the seed of an equal or greater benefit, the losing streak that strips away false confidence and forces genuine study, the bankroll hit that imposes discipline that comfort never would have required, the bad run that exposes leaks that were hidden during winning stretches. Persistence is what keeps you in the game long enough to harvest those seeds. Define what persistence looks like for your poker development. Not abstractly. Specifically, what is the downswing threshold beneath which you continue studying rather than panicking? What is the standard of process quality that you refuse to abandon regardless of results? How long are you genuinely committed to the goal you defined in the first principle? Answer those questions before the adversity arrives, because adversity arrives for everyone, and the players who have the answers ready are the ones who come out the other side. The next principle addresses something that the best players in the world use deliberately, and most players experience accidentally, and the difference between those two relationships with it is enormous. Hill called it the Mastermind alliance, the principle that the mind does not develop at its maximum potential in isolation, that when two or more people bring their thinking together in a spirit of genuine cooperation toward a shared goal, something emerges that neither mind could produce alone. In the world of business, Hill was describing partnerships, boards, advisory circles. In the world of poker, this principle maps directly to something the best players have always understood intuitively, that who you learn from and who you discuss hands with determines, more than almost any other factor, how fast and how far your game develops. Think about what happens to a player who studies entirely alone. They review their own sessions. They identify what they can identify, which is limited by what they already know, because you cannot see the blind spots created by your own thinking. They make improvements in areas where their existing knowledge base allows them to recognize problems. But the structural leaks, the conceptual gaps, the fundamental misunderstandings about ranges or equity or game theory that are built into the foundation of their thinking, those are invisible without someone else's perspective. Now think about a player in a serious study group with 2 or 3 players who are better than them. Every hand reviewed reveals information the player couldn't have gotten alone. Every conceptual framework they hold gets pressure tested by minds with different experience and different angles of approach. The corrections are faster, the improvements are deeper. The calibration of what good play looks like is set against a higher standard. This is not just about having poker friends. It is about deliberately constructing the intellectual environment that accelerates development. It means being willing to be the worst player in the study group, which Hill would recognize immediately as the most advantageous possible position. The person who is surrounded by excellence, who is consistently exposed to thinking that exceeds their current level, grows faster than any amount of solitary practice allows. The corollary is equally important. The player who spends their mental energy reinforcing their existing biases, who surrounds themselves with players at the same level or lower, who seeks validation rather than correction, who avoids the discomfort of having gaps in their thinking exposed, is using the mastermind principle in reverse. They are compounding stagnation rather than compounding growth. Before we get to the next principle, and there's something coming up that completely reframes how you think about short-term losses, let's take a moment to talk about something concrete. If you're serious about building the complete mental and strategic framework for high-level poker, the channel has put together something specifically for players at this level. A complete collection of 10 advanced poker books, covering the full landscape of what winning players think about. Poker math, the mental game, variance and long-term thinking, psychology at the table, advanced aggression systems, and decision-making frameworks that go far beyond any individual concept. Each book is available individually on Amazon for $9.99. But if you want the complete collection, all 10 books, the entire framework, viewers of this channel can access the full package for just $29.90. The link is in the pinned comment right now. Serious players who want to shorten their learning curve significantly, go check it out. Now, back to Napoleon Hill, and the principle that changes everything about how you handle the session when nothing goes right. Hill wrote about what he called specialized knowledge, the idea that general knowledge has almost no value in the real world, that what creates results is specific, applied, actionable knowledge directed at a particular goal. The brilliant person who knows a little about everything achieves far less than the focused person who has built deep mastery in a targeted domain. In poker, this is a warning against the most common form of studying that produces the least improvement: passive consumption, reading articles, watching training videos without taking notes or doing deliberate follow-up, discussing hands in general terms without working through the specific mathematics, learning about concepts without stress testing them against actual decisions. Specialized knowledge in poker means knowing exactly what your edge is and where it comes from. It means understanding not just that you should be more aggressive in 3-bet pots, but exactly which hands, in which positions, against which types of players, on which board textures. It means understanding not just that tilt costs money, but the specific emotional triggers that produce your tilt, the specific sequence of events that leads from a bad beat to a cascading series of poor decisions. This specificity is work. It requires honest self-examination. It requires the kind of study that is uncomfortable because it forces you to look at your own game without the protective filters that make you feel like you're playing better than you are. Hill observed that most people stop acquiring specialized knowledge the moment they achieve a threshold of surface competence. They know enough to function. They know enough to not feel like beginners. And that threshold becomes a ceiling rather than a floor, because the knowledge they need to break through to the next level requires acknowledging that their current level is insufficient. The greatest edge available in poker is not the latest solver output or the newest training site. It is the willingness to do the work that most players avoid, the uncomfortable, specific, honest examination of where the game is being played incorrectly. That work, done consistently and seriously, produces improvements that no amount of general knowledge about poker ever will. What comes next is the principle Hill considered the engine behind all of the others, the force that turns knowledge and desire and faith and persistence into actual results. There's imagination. Hill wrote about 2 types. Synthetic imagination, which takes existing ideas and rearranges them into new combinations, the kind of thinking most players use when they learn new strategies and apply them in familiar ways. And creative imagination, which operates at a different level entirely. The kind of thinking that creates novel solutions to problems that existing frameworks don't address. In poker, creative imagination is what separates players who execute existing playbooks from players who develop new concepts, new lines, new reads of table dynamics that other players haven't seen yet. It is what allows a player to look at a spot that doesn't fit neatly into any framework they've been taught and construct, from first principles, the approach most likely to be correct. But Hill's point about imagination goes beyond strategy. He wrote that your imagination is the workshop where you build the plans that achieve your desires. The player who cannot vividly imagine themselves as a winning player, who cannot construct a detailed mental image of what that looks like, what it feels like, how they make decisions in that state, is operating without the mental blueprint that guides all the work toward its destination. This is not mystical. It is practical psychology. The mind navigates toward what it can picture clearly. The player who has a vivid, specific image of the kind of player they want to become, who can feel the composure of that player in a pressure situation, who can experience mentally the discipline of that player making a correct fold when every instinct says call, is doing something very real. They are preloading the neural pathways that will influence behavior in the moments when behavior is hardest to control. Sit with that for a moment. Before the next important session, spend 5 minutes not reviewing strategy but imagining, clearly, specifically, in detail, the player you are becoming. Not the player you are today, the one you are building. Feel what it feels like to be completely detached from outcome. Feel what it feels like to make a difficult fold that every other player would have called. Feel what it feels like to execute a well-timed bluff with the calm certainty of someone who has done the work. That is not self-delusion. It is architectural. You are building the mental infrastructure that your behavior follows. The next section is where Hill's principles stop being inspirational and start being operational. And it's the piece that most players have never been taught in any poker course they've ever taken. Decision. Hill devoted significant attention to the observation that successful people make decisions quickly and change them slowly, while unsuccessful people make decisions slowly and change them quickly. The analysis paralysis pattern, the endless deliberation that substitutes for commitment, the constant revision of direction based on the latest piece of information. These are patterns of indecision that erode both productivity and confidence over time. In poker, this maps to something the game reveals with uncomfortable precision. The player who makes decisions tentatively, who arrives at an action with residual doubt, who executes a bet with part of their mind already rehearsing the regret narrative in case it goes wrong, is a less effective player than the player who commits fully to a decision based on a rigorous process and then releases attachment to the outcome. This is not about certainty. Poker is a game of uncertainty. No one has certainty. The point is about the quality of the decision process and the completeness of the commitment to executing the decision once made. Half-hearted execution of a correct play produces worse outcomes than full committed execution of the same play. The physical tells created by tentative betting, the sizing inconsistencies created by indecision, the exploitable patterns created by players who adjust mid-action because they've lost confidence. These are costs of indecision that appear nowhere in the strategy discussion, but show up clearly in the results. The mental discipline that Hill describes, making the decision based on your best analysis, committing to it fully, and then evaluating it afterward in the cold light of process review, outcome review, is the antidote to both tentative execution and outcome-based tilting. If you review your decisions by their quality rather than their results, you simultaneously improve your decision process and protect your emotional state from the natural volatility of results. This requires building a dual-track relationship with the game. Track 1, in the moment, fully committed to the action, completely present, executing with conviction. Track 2, after the session, honest, analytical, process-focused, willing to critique every decision without ego involvement. The player who can maintain both tracks, full commitment in the moment and ruthless self-analysis afterward, is the player whose decision quality compounds over time in a way that no short-term result can derail. What comes next is the principle that creates the most direct line between Napoleon Hill's thinking and the financial realities of playing poker seriously. Hill wrote about the power of organized planning, the idea that desire without a plan is just a wish, and that translating a burning goal into specific sequential actions is the mechanism by which the mind's vision becomes the world's reality. In poker, organized planning addresses something that separates professional thinking from amateur thinking more clearly than any strategic concept. Professionals think about the game in terms of systems. Bankroll management is not an option they consider when they're running bad. It is a pre-committed structural rule that the emotional state of any given session has no authority to override. Study schedules are not something they get to when they feel like it. They are fixed appointments that exist with the same status as any other professional obligation. This planning extends to variance. The professional who has organized a plan knows what the expected downswing variance is for their stake and win rate. They know, before the downswing arrives, that it will arrive, what it will look like, and what they will do when it does. The emotional devastation of a downswing is reduced not by luck or mental strength, but by preparation. By having built the plan before the adversity, so that the adversity triggers the execution of a predetermined response, rather than an improvised emotional reaction. The amateur plans reactively. They think about bankroll management after the bankroll is damaged. They think about tilt control after the tilt has already cost them a significant portion of the session. They make decisions about moving up in stakes based on how they feel, rather than what the bankroll math requires. Every one of these reactive decisions is more expensive than the proactive version would have been, and the accumulated cost of reactive rather than organized planning is one of the primary separators between players who grow and players who stay stuck. Build the plan before you need it. Define the bankroll thresholds for moving up and down. Define the study commitment that is non-negotiable. Define what a session-ending trigger looks like and honor it before the emotion arrives, not after. This is not inflexibility. It is the architectural support that allows the emotional, pressured, variance-exposed version of yourself, the one actually sitting at the table, to operate inside a structure that the calm, rational, planning version of yourself already created. Near the end of this video, we'll come back to something important about the tools that accelerate all of this. But first, the principle that Hill saved for last, and for good reason: the subconscious mind. Hill wrote about it in the context of how the dominant thoughts held in a person's mind over time shape their automatic responses, their emotional reactions, their instinctive behavior in pressure situations. The subconscious, he argued, cannot distinguish between what is real and what is vividly imagined, and it acts on both with equal force. Feed it thoughts of failure, of inadequacy, of expecting the worst, and it produces behavior consistent with those beliefs. Feed it thoughts of competence, of process quality, of confidence earned through preparation, and it produces behavior consistent with those beliefs instead. In poker, this is not abstract philosophy. This is the direct explanation for tilt. Tilt is not a decision. It is an automatic response produced by a subconscious that has been fed a specific pattern of thought. The thought that a bad beat is a personal injustice. That variance is something that happens to you rather than something that happens to everyone. That losing a pot you should have won means the outcome of the session is now compromised and emergency measures are justified. Those thoughts, held consistently over time, produce automatic emotional responses that appear at the table without conscious permission. The path to tilt resistance is not willpower deployed in the moment. It is the gradual reprogramming of the dominant thoughts about variance, about losing, about what a bad beat means, that are held in between sessions. Players who have done this work are not less affected by bad beats because they are suppressing the emotional reaction. They are less affected because the meaning they have assigned to bad beats, over months and years of deliberate mental work, is genuinely different. The bad beat is data. It is an instance of a known phenomenon. It is not a threat to identity or a signal about future outcomes. This work is slow. It does not happen in a single session or a single conversation. It happens through the consistent application of the same principles we've discussed: desire, faith, persistence, imagination, decision quality, over a time horizon that is long enough for the subconscious to actually update. The players who are genuinely difficult to play against, the ones who don't react, who don't change gear after a bad run, who seem unaffected by the volatility that other players visibly suffer through, have done this work. Not because they were born with better emotional regulation, because they built it deliberately over time. This is what it means to develop the mindset that turns grinders into legends. Not a technique, an architecture. Before the final section, if you've made it this far and you're serious about building this architecture systematically, the complete 10-book poker collection we mentioned earlier is the fastest structured path to that framework. Every book in the collection addresses a different dimension of what we've discussed today: the math, the mental game, the aggression systems, the variance framework, the decision-making psychology. All 10 books for $29.90, link in the pinned comment. For players who are done learning randomly and want a complete system, go look at it now. The conclusion, and what Napoleon Hill's work actually means for the player you are building yourself into becoming. And Hill ended Think and Grow Rich with a reflection that applies with almost uncanny precision to poker. He wrote that success in any field is not a matter of chance. It is a matter of deliberate, sustained application of specific mental principles to a specific goal. And that the most important decision any person makes is the decision about what kind of thinker they are going to be. Because thinking precedes everything, determines everything, and ultimately becomes everything. Poker is not a game of cards. It never was. The cards are a randomization device that creates uncertainty, and uncertainty is the arena in which decisions must be made. Character is revealed, and the quality of a player's mental architecture is tested in real time, under real pressure, with real financial consequences. Every principle Hill identified in his study of exceptional achievers applies at this table. The desire that sustains study when the results don't justify it. The faith that keeps the long-term process intact when the short-term evidence argues for abandoning it. The persistence that turns a devastating downswing into the pressure that forges a stronger, more calibrated player. The mastermind alliance that accelerates development beyond what isolation ever allows. The specialized knowledge that builds genuine, exploitable edge. The imagination that constructs the mental blueprint of the player you are becoming. The decisiveness that commits fully to the correct action and evaluates it honestly afterward. The organized plan that prevents the emotional version of yourself from overriding the rational version, and the subconscious reprogramming that eventually makes all of these responses automatic. The player who internalizes all of this is not a better poker player. They are a different kind of person at the poker table. One whose relationship with the game, with variance, with winning and losing, with the long-term horizon, is fundamentally different from the player who has not done this work. That different relationship produces different results. Not immediately, not in a way that shows up in any single session, but over the time horizon that actually matters, across hundreds of sessions, across years, across the kind of run that separates career results from hobby results. The player who has built this architecture compounds in a direction that cannot be replicated by any strategy shortcut. This is what Mind of a Grinder has always been about, not the latest solver output, not the current metagame adjustment. The complete mental framework of the player who is built to win over time, in every condition, under every kind of pressure. If this resonated, if you left this video with something real, like the video, share it with a player who is serious about the game and deserves to hear this. Subscribe to Mind of a Grinder for the ongoing development of exactly this kind of thinking. And remember, the game is not about the cards. The game was always about the mind. Build the mind first. Results take care of themselves.